Cameron Drake sat at the small outdoor table, trying to remember why he'd agreed to this blind date. His sister had set it up, insisting he needed to get out more, meet someone, stop using work as an excuse to avoid life. So here he was at Bruno's sandwich shop, waiting for someone named Victoria. At 31, Cameron had been on enough blind dates to know they rarely went well. There was always something. Mismatched expectations, forced conversation. That awkward moment when you both realize there's no connection but still have to finish your coffee out of politeness. He checked his phone. 7:15. She was 15 minutes late. Maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe his sister had oversold him. Maybe he should just leave and tell everyone he'd tried. Then he saw her. A woman in a cream-colored blazer was wheeling toward him in a sleek black wheelchair, navigating the sidewalk with practiced ease. She had long blonde hair that fell in waves over her shoulders, delicate pearl earrings, and an expression that suggested she was bracing herself for disappointment. Cameron stood, suddenly understanding why she might be late. The city wasn't exactly wheelchair-friendly, and getting to this particular corner probably required navigating several blocks of uneven sidewalk. "Cameron?" she asked as she approached. "That's me. You must be Victoria." "I am." "I'm sorry I'm late. The accessibility ramp at the subway station was broken, so I had to take a longer route." She said it matter-of-factly, not apologetically, like she was simply stating a fact. "No problem. I just got here myself," Cameron lied smoothly. He gestured to the table. "Is this okay, or would you prefer to sit somewhere else?" Victoria looked surprised by the question, like she hadn't expected him to ask. "This is fine, actually. The height is perfect." Cameron sat back down, and they were quiet for a moment. He could see Victoria watching him, waiting for something. It took him a moment to realize what. She was waiting for him to make an excuse and leave. "So," he said, picking up his menu, "my sister tells me you run your own company." "That's impressive. What kind of business?" Victoria's expression shifted, became less guarded. "Digital marketing and accessibility consulting. We help companies make their online presence more accessible to people with disabilities. It's a growing field, thankfully. Companies are finally realizing that accessible design benefits everyone." "That makes sense. How did you get into that?" "Personal experience, mostly. I became paralyzed in a car accident 7 years ago. Spinal cord injury, T6 level. When I was going through rehab and trying to rebuild my life, I realized how many barriers existed, not just physical ones, but digital ones too. Websites I couldn't navigate, apps I couldn't use, online stores where I couldn't complete a purchase because the checkout wasn't compatible with screen readers." She spoke with confidence. Not shame or self-pity, just straightforward honesty. Cameron found himself leaning forward, genuinely interested. "So you built a company to fix that problem?" "Exactly. Started small, just me and a laptop, consulting for local businesses. 5 years later, I have 23 employees and clients across the country. We're doing well. A server came by and they ordered sandwiches and iced tea. When the server left, Victoria looked at Cameron directly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why are you still here?" Cameron blinked. "What do you mean?" "I've been on 16 blind dates in the past 2 years. Every single one of them, the guy takes one look at the wheelchair and suddenly remembers an emergency at work or a sick relative or just makes some excuse and leaves within 5 minutes. You've been here for 10. You ordered food. You're asking about my work like you actually care. So I'm wondering, why are you still here?" The question was direct, almost challenging. But beneath it, Cameron heard something else. Vulnerability. A history of rejection that had taught her to expect the worst. "I'm still here because I want to be," Cameron said simply. "Because you seem interesting. Because I want to hear more about your company. Because my sandwich is going to be really good and I'm hungry. And because the wheelchair is just a chair. You're the interesting part." Victoria stared at him, and for a moment Cameron thought he'd said something wrong. Then her eyes filled with tears, though she blinked them back quickly. "Thank you for seeing me," she said quietly. Those 6 words hit Cameron harder than he expected. Thank you for seeing me. Not the chair, not the disability, not the limitation. Me! "For what it's worth," he said. "I think those 16 guys were idiots. Victoria laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. To be fair, they were honest about not being able to handle it. That's better than sticking around out of pity. Is that what you think I'm doing? Isn't it? No. I'm here because my sister dragged me kicking and screaming back into the dating world after a bad breakup, and I was planning to be polite for exactly 20 minutes before making my escape. But then you showed up and started talking about accessibility consulting with this passion in your voice, and I realized I actually want to know more. Not about the wheelchair. About you. What makes you laugh? What you do when you're not working? Whether you're a morning person or a night owl. All the normal getting to know you stuff. Victoria studied him for a long moment. You're either the best liar I've ever met, or you're genuinely different from the other guys. I'm genuinely hungry and genuinely curious. Is that enough? Their sandwiches arrived and the conversation shifted to easier topics. Cameron told her about his work as an architect, designing buildings with a focus on sustainable design. Victoria asked intelligent questions about his projects, and he found himself explaining concepts he rarely discussed outside of work. Have you ever considered accessibility in your designs? Victoria asked between bites of her sandwich. We meet ADA requirements, of course. That's not what I asked. Meeting minimum requirements and actually designing with accessibility in mind are two different things. One is compliance. The other is inclusion. Cameron paused. I've never thought about it that way. Most people don't. They think a ramp and a wide doorway check the box. But real accessibility means thinking about sight lines from a seated position, about placement of light switches and door handles, about texture and color contrast for people with visual impairments. It means designing spaces where everyone feels like they belong, not just that they're being accommodated. You're passionate about this. I am, because I've been in too many beautiful buildings that I couldn't fully access. Too many spaces that were technically compliant but made me feel like an afterthought. Architecture has the power to include or exclude people. Most architects don't realize how much power they have. Cameron found himself thinking about his recent projects, seeing them through new eyes. Would you be willing to consult on a project? I'm designing a community center. I'd love your input on making it truly accessible, not just compliant. Victoria's eyes lit up. Seriously? Absolutely. I'll pay your regular consulting rate. This isn't charity or a date obligation. I genuinely think you could make the project better. Then yes, I'd love to. They talked for 2 hours, long after their sandwiches were finished and the iced tea was just melted ice. They talked about work and family and dreams. Victoria told him about her sister who'd helped her through rehab, about learning to see her wheelchair not as a limitation, but as a tool that gave her mobility. Cameron told her about his breakup, about his ex who'd left because she wanted someone more ambitious, someone who'd work 100-hour weeks to climb the corporate ladder. She didn't understand that I actually like my life, Cameron said. I like leaving work at 6 to go for a run or read a book or just sit and think. She saw it as lack of ambition. I saw it as having a life. I get that, Victoria said. I work hard, but I also make time for things I love. Wine tasting with friends, adaptive yoga, traveling when I can. My chair doesn't define me, but my ex-boyfriends acted like it should. Like I should be grateful for their attention and not expect a real partnership. That's terrible. It is. But it also taught me not to settle. I'd rather be alone than be with someone who sees me as a limitation or a project to fix. You're not a limitation. You're a successful business owner having dinner with an architect who's realizing he's been thinking about his work all wrong. That's pretty impressive. Victoria smiled, really smiled. And Cameron realized how beautiful she was when she wasn't bracing for rejection. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave, Victoria hesitated. Can I ask you something? Anything. Why didn't you leave? Really? I need to know if this was pity or politeness or something else. Cameron thought about it, wanting to give her an honest answer. When you wheeled up, my first thought wasn't about the chair. It was that my sister had been right about you being pretty. My second thought was wondering if you were as nervous as I was. When you apologized for being late and explained about the broken ramp, I thought about how the city should do better, not that you were inconvenient. And when you started talking about your company, I forgot about the chair entirely because I was too busy being impressed by what you'd built. He leaned forward. I didn't stay out of pity. I stayed because I haven't had this good a conversation in months. Because you challenged me to think differently about my work. Because you made me laugh. Because when you said thank you for seeing me, I realized that I do see you. And I like what I see. Victoria's eyes were bright again. I'd like to see you again. If you want, I absolutely want that. They exchanged numbers, made plans for a second date. Cameron walked with Victoria to the accessible subway entrance 6 blocks away, not because he thought she needed help, but because he wasn't ready for the evening to end. Thank you, Victoria said as they reached the entrance. For staying, for listening, for seeing me. Thank you, Cameron replied, for giving me a chance to. They dated for 6 months before Cameron asked Victoria to move in with him. Not because it was the next logical step, but because he hated the nights they spent apart. Her apartment was in his building anyway, just 2 floors down, and it seemed silly to maintain 2 separate spaces when they wanted to be together. Victoria brought more than just her belongings. She brought new perspective to Cameron's life and work. He started designing with true accessibility in mind, consulting with Victoria's team on every project. His buildings became known for their inclusive design, winning awards and recognition. But more importantly, Victoria brought joy. She taught Cameron to see challenges as opportunities, to find humor in obstacles, to appreciate what he had rather than worry about what he lacked. She introduced him to adaptive sports and dragged him to wine tastings where he learned he had a terrible palate. She pushed him to be better, not by criticizing who he was, but by showing him what was possible. A year later, Cameron proposed. Not at a fancy restaurant or on a romantic vacation, but at Bruno's sandwich shop, at the same outdoor table where they'd had their first date. You saw me when others only saw a wheelchair, Victoria said through tears of joy. You stayed when everyone else left. You made me believe that someone could love all of me, not just the parts that were easy. You're wrong about one thing, Cameron said as he slipped the ring on her finger. Nothing about you is easy. You're complicated and challenging, and you make me question everything I thought I knew. But you're also brilliant and funny and the best thing that ever happened to me. I didn't stay because it was easy. I stayed because you were worth staying for. At their wedding, Cameron's sister gave a speech about setting them up, about how she'd worried no one would see past Victoria's wheelchair to the amazing woman she was. But Cameron did, she concluded. He saw Victoria. Not the disability, not the limitation, just Victoria. And that's what love is, really. Seeing someone completely and choosing them anyway. Or maybe choosing them because you see them completely. Years later, they'd still sometimes go to Bruno's for sandwiches, sitting at that same outdoor table. Victoria's company had grown to over 100 employees. Cameron's firm was recognized as a leader in accessible design. Together, they'd created a foundation that provided scholarships for students with disabilities studying architecture and design. But more than their professional success, they'd built a life based on really seeing each other. Not just the surface, not just the easy parts, but the complicated, messy, beautiful reality of who they were. Victoria never forgot what it felt like to be invisible, to be reduced to her disability, to watch date after date make excuses and leave. She never forgot what it meant when Cameron stayed, and Cameron never forgot that moment when Victoria said, "Thank you for seeing me," teaching him that sometimes the greatest gift we can give another person is to truly see them. Not who we want them to be, not who we think they should be, but exactly who they are. The blind date that should have been a disaster became a love story. The woman in the wheelchair became a wife, a partner, a best friend. And the man who almost left after 5 minutes stayed for a lifetime. Because sometimes love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about seeing someone completely and realizing they're perfect for you. If this story reminded you that everyone deserves to be truly seen, please like, share, and subscribe. Comment below about someone who saw past surface level to recognize your true worth. We all have something that makes us feel invisible sometimes. The gift is finding people who look deeper and stay anyway. That's not pity, that's love.